as you come in, you could just share in the chat where you are joining us from. And if you feel comfortable, this is completely optional. The ages of your teenagers. It is not a requirement to have teenagers to be here for this talk. You may have had them or your children are younger, so don't feel like you're not in the right place if you're not currently parenting teenagers. And yeah, you don't have to share, but if you feel like you want to, it'd be great just to get a sense for who's in the room, where everyone is. Thanks, everyone. Welcome, Lauren. Yeah, and your 13-year-old. Hi, Courtney. Toronto, Monica, welcome. Aaron, hey, you're in the thick of it like me. Hi, Liz, always great to see you. Hello, Aaron Crotty, Columbus, Ohio. Great to meet you. Monica, yeah. Hey, Randy. Good to see you, Katie. Fallon, great to see you. Hi, Laura, welcome from Portland, 15 and 19. Lauren from Boston. Pam, 16, 18, 20. You're ahead of me. Hi, Julie, welcome. Great to see you. Hey, Leah, nice to see you here. Katie, oh, hi. Any friend of Courtney is a friend of mine. Welcome, nice to meet you. And Barbie, 14-year-old Montclair, awesome. Okay, let's see. Screen sharing, which is always slightly challenging for me to figure out what's happening. Here we go. I have the chat. I have this. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to take down this. Hi, Alexia. Nice to see you. I'm going to take down this screen share just because I get to see you. I'll do a little intro and then we'll go back to my slideshow. Thanks, everyone, so much for being here. I appreciate it. I love to see some familiar faces and some new faces. It's always fun to meet people in this context. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of myself for those of you who don't know me. Myself and Nushu, the company through which, the vehicle through which I do my work in the world. So I'm Vanessa Cornell, founder of Nushu. I was an overachiever for many, many years. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this. I did all the things I was supposed to do. I was a really good student. I went to Harvard. I went to Goldman Sachs. I worked hard. I had 5 kids in 6 years. I overachieved at bearing children also. And then I got to a place where I just cracked. I completely fell apart. I had been achieving and holding it in and just doing the good work and never stopping to think how I felt or whether I needed anything for so long. And eventually I just exploded. And out of that big gash opening, which was very painful at the time, I started to create an awareness of my own inner landscape that has been the basis of all of my work through Nushu so far. The main thing that I do in Nushu is hold space. I do it in a couple of different ways. It's the thing I'm super fascinated by. Nushu Group, which is a small group gathering where people get to just share what's on their mind, take off their masks, not have to pretend, not have to be strong, just kind of tell the truth and be accepted for that. I do a Nushu Group facilitator training where I teach people to hold that kind of space. And we do courses and retreats through Nushu, all of which, frankly, have the common theme of holding space. So this is what I'm really fascinated by. Like, how can we create spaces? We'll talk a little bit more about what it means to hold space. How can we create spaces where people feel safe to be who they are? Okay, so I'm sure that my team will drop it in the chat, but if you're interested in learning more about Nushu in general, we'll do this at the end too, no urgency. We have a great website, Instagram and newsletter, and that's the way to find out about our offerings. But for today, we're talking about holding space for teenagers. And it's important for me to share with you that I'm not a parenting expert. I'm only an expert in my own parenting journey, as are each of you. What I do spend a lot of time thinking about and have dedicated, sort of full-time plus over the past couple of years to figuring out is how does one create the environment and the possibility for people to be who they are without fear of being judged in your presence? How can you be that presence for somebody that allows them to feel like, yeah, I can really just be myself here? And so today is really about applying that very question specifically to how can I allow or create that empowered space for my teenager to become who they are, to feel confident in becoming who they are. So again, I'm not going to be doing kind of parenting suggestions. Like there's a lot of parenting stuff like setting boundaries and consequences and all this stuff. I'm not going to be touching any of that. The only thing I'm really going to be talking about is like, how do you just hold that space for them to feel like they can share with you who they actually are? All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is kind of acknowledge, and I did this in the newsletter introducing this talk, how hard this is, how hard this process is. And one of the surprising things I learned about raising teenagers is it's shocking how few answers there are, or how obvious, how non-obvious the answer is to every question that you have in your mind. How should I handle this? Right? There's like no playbook. It's very, very confusing and it's very, very difficult. So I just want to put out there that let's just start from a place of like, you're doing a great job. Most of my reminders that I give to other people are really mostly for myself. So Vanessa, you're doing a great job. All of you, you're doing a great job. It's so hard. It's so confusing. It's so difficult to know the right answer. So let's just start with that premise. I'm going to do a little poll here. This is a different number. Like, how hard is it to raise a teenager on a scale of 1 to 10? If you want to drop your answer in the chat. Where 1 is like, this is the easiest thing I've ever done in my life. And 10 is like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. 15, yeah, Lauren, I got you. I see you. 10, 100, 20, 10, right? So if you think that you're like, why is this so hard? Why is this so hard for me? It's not that hard for everyone else. It must just be me that it's hard for. No, I mean, look at these answers. 10, 8, 7, Randy, but just starting. Yeah, you're not quite there yet. 10, 20, 100, 10, 10, 15, 10, 10. So like if it's really, really hard for you, you are not alone. It's like impossible. We're going to start with that and we're going to end with that. Okay. So the way this is going to go is I have a little slide presentation. I'm going to go through the slides. And then I'm hoping that we have some time for questions, sharing, discussion towards the end of the talk, because it's much more fun than listening to me talk. But let's get started. I really encourage you, if you have thoughts throughout this presentation, to drop them in the chat. One of the things that I think is the most healing is to be around other people who are having a hard time when you're having a hard time, so that you don't feel alone. And if you're having a thought, probably somebody else is having it. And if you share it out loud and you maybe put it in the chat, it might help someone else be like, oh God, it's not just me thinking that. So any thoughts you have, any ideas, anything that springs to mind, please, I'd be thrilled if there was just an active chat happening as we go. Okay, let's get started. Okay, how to hold space for your teenager. So again, it's like, people throw this word around a lot, right? How to hold space, but what does it actually mean? What are we actually talking about when we talk about holding space? And so let's talk about what it is and what it isn't. I'm just reiterating here, it's not a parenting masterclass. Parenting is an active verb, right? Like, I don't know when we decided that parenting was like a job and an active verb, but parenting kind of implies action. Like, what do you do? How do you react? What consequences do you give? And so this is not a parenting masterclass. I would really characterize it more as a listening masterclass. And the important part of holding space is there is no action in holding space. You don't actually do anything. I mean, you do, but let's try and think about like, what's our relationship with thinking that like we always have to do something, we always have to be active. So let's talk about what holding space includes. Holding space really includes just awareness. which is just noticing. My kind of dialogue in my head when I'm thinking about awareness is, oh, interesting. Involves a lot of curiosity. Reflection. So we'll talk about it a little bit later. Reflecting back to someone what they said, not doing anything about it, not changing it, not fixing it, but just reflecting it back to them. Acknowledgement. I hear what you've said. Affirmation. You're allowed to say what you said and feel what you felt, sort of similar to validation. Allowing and acceptance, right? So there's no action in any of these things, which you would think like, you don't have to do anything that's easier than doing something. But in fact, I think for most of us, the opposite is true, right? It's like when we love somebody, we want to do something. We want to do something about it, particularly when they're in distress. And so part of what we're going to be talking about today is how do we actually take ourselves out of action and go more into awareness, reflection, acknowledgement. Okay, so holding space does not include distracting, avoiding, fixing, controlling. Right? So maybe some of you guys are thinking like, I don't do those things, like I don't do those things with my kids. And maybe you don't, but maybe you think of it more as like solving, right? Like I don't try to fix, I just try to solve the problem my kid is having. Or maybe you think of it as helping. I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to help. And so what we want to do in this class is kind of create an awareness of where our desire to feel like we're helping, like we're doing something, like we're helping our kid feel better, can actually be counterproductive with respect to holding space for them and just like allowing what is to be and not intervening, not taking any action. Okay. This is like my very favorite all-time quote. This is a quote I've used in every Nushu group facilitator training I've run by Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, listen with only one purpose, to allow the other person to empty their heart. I carry this with me also. It's like, if you are allowing somebody to empty their heart, you are helping, but there's no action involved. There's just a receiving and there's just a listening. And it's incredibly valuable and difficult to achieve. So let's talk about how to achieve it. So kids need three things, in my opinion. Other people may disagree. It's just my opinion. They want to feel loved. They want to feel safe, and they want to feel seen. Now, I think everyone on this call is pretty good with the love part, right? Like if I polled you guys, like, how much do you love your kids? You'd be like, I love my kids off the chart. How much do you want to make your kids feel safe? Create an environment of safety. You'd be like, oh my gosh, of course I want my kid to feel safe. But the one that trips us up is when kids want to feel seen. Because what happens is we are seeing them, right? We're seeing them, but when we see them through our eyes, we're seeing them through our lens, through our collective experience, to our collective fears and worries and experiences of how our life turned out, how we were raised, and everything that's happened to us in our entire life. So that lens can be kind of muddy, right? I'll give you an extreme example. It's like the dad who never got to play football in college, and all he wants is a kid to realize his dream of playing football. And so through that lens of, oh my gosh, I really need this fulfilled through my child, he may not be able to see or want to see that his kid is not a football player. His kid is an artist or an intellectual or something else, right? And so what we are going to talk a lot about is our own lens and managing our own lens so that we can see our kids for who they are, which is harder than it sounds. It's actually really hard. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so why is it so hard to hold space for our teens? Why is it so hard to just allow, accept, listen, affirm? Because, I mean, sometimes the stuff they say is so crazy, right? I mean, my kids can say in one sentence two completely opposite things. In like one grammatically correct sentence, they can say two things that are completely in opposition to each other, right? They can be so irrational, like that prefrontal cortex is super not online. They're so emotional. They're making these mistakes that are so obvious to us. We're like, oh my gosh, the answer's so obvious. I know what's happening. Or they're in pain. And we're like, distressed because we're seeing they're distressed, right? Or so they make us angry, they make us sad, they make us frustrated, they make us fearful. Like, they elicit a lot of stuff in us. And so it's really hard to be like, I am just going to stay steady and reflect this back to you. I am just going to stay steady and allow this to be, because we want to relieve their distress and we want to release our distress. So let's also just hold some space for the fact that this is really, really hard to do, really hard to do. And there isn't really such thing as doing it perfectly ever. There is such thing as raising our awareness of it. So let's talk specifically about how uncomfortable and activating it is when your kid is having a hard time. When your kid is upset about something or in conflict, or upset with you, mad at you, or not happy with a boundary you've set. I personally think that the kids are in trouble, that the kids' ability right now to tolerate discomfort is at an all-time low. They are self-medicating themselves with that phone. I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this way, right? So their ability to tolerate discomfort is at an all-time low. And so when we notice their discomfort, we don't, we love our kids. We don't want them to be upset or hurt, sad, anxious. When we swoop in to fix them, soothe them, or rescue them, we're undermining their opportunity to build this tolerance, right? I totally get it. I do it too. And so this is just to say, can we reframe it to say, my kid is in distress and they are building their tolerance for this distress. Now, this is not if a kid is in crisis. This is not if a kid is having panic attacks, right? Like, I don't want to pretend like in every situation, it's not right to intervene, right? And this is not my area of expertise. I'm saying, in your judgment as a parent, if your kid is okay, but uncomfortable, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's okay for them to learn and sit in that. So one of the reasons I think that we swoop in to fix, soothe, or rescue is because we are so uncomfortable observing their discomfort. And so the first thing I would say is, when your kiddos are really upset or mad or uncomfortable, just take a quick notice of, how does observing that and being with that feel to me? How is this in my own experience? Because a lot of times what we're doing is, yeah, we're soothing them, but we're really soothing ourselves. So can we both model and create space for them sitting in their discomfort by us acknowledging, recognizing, and tolerating our own discomfort with them? So noticing our own discomfort. All right, so this is another quote I've used in facilitator training. Like, holding space for others is super easy, as long as you don't have any fears, triggers, old stories, insecurities, patterns, or blind spots of your own, right? It's like, it's so easy to be a steady, accepting, welcoming presence if you have none of these. But of course, as human beings, we all have these. Of course we have these. And so the idea is not to say, like, you cannot be a good parent. You can't hold space well unless you get rid of all of these, because it's just not possible. So we're not going to get rid of them. We're just going to notice them. We're just going to create an awareness of them. And that's going to make a big difference. Let me just check in the chat. Awesome. All right, so another definition of holding space, in the context of noticing your own experience while you're trying to be there for your kid, Holding space, and this is courtesy of one of our Nutri Group facilitators, Beth, and I've asked her permission to use her words in this way. Managing your own experience so that you can witness another in a way that allows them to have their own experience. So notice here that you're managing your own experience, you're being a witness, and the other person is having their experience. And there's no crossing over from your side of the street to their side of the street. There's no swooping in, there's no intervening. Now, I want to be clear that parents need to intervene sometimes, right? These kids are not adults. We need to intervene, make decisions for them, put up boundaries, and all of that is good. So I'm only talking about with respect to holding space, right? With respect to other things, like they are not adults yet and we are still in charge and we can still make decisions. But with respect to specifically holding space, if you're in I'm not enforcing, or taking an action that I think is right for my child right now, if you're just in the holding space, if that's what you're trying to do, let's try and think about their side of the street and our side of the street. What's on our side of the street? What's in our experience that we can manage so that we don't cross over, so that they can have their own experience. So here, whose side of the street is it on anyway? So I'll give you an example. Let's say your kid says something or does something, and you are like super activated, super activated. The question is this about them or is this about me? Whose side of the street is it on? One of the clues to the fact that it's not on their side of the street is if your reaction is out of proportion with what happened, because then it's activating something in you. If your reaction is like, oh my gosh, I just reacted like big to something that maybe wasn't so big that my kid did. If there's that reaction, it's probably something in you. And so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to create not reactivity, not reaction, but maybe a considered action. Maybe we hear our child and then we take a considered action, but we don't just react in the moment. And the opposite of this reactivity is steadiness. So a steady presence where a child can be herself or himself. All right, we're going to keep going on whose side of the street is it on. So, all right, how do we sweep our side of the street? Let's say your kid comes to you and says, my friends are being mean to me and they're excluding me. And maybe you, in your childhood, had an incident with bullying. And your reaction is, get rid of those friends. They don't really care for you anyway. Like if they're acting that way, they don't really care for you. And why don't you just get rid of them and go find friends who are really going to care for you? Like it's not an unreasonable sort of approach. But maybe you're really quick to say that, really quick to create a solution because you remember what it felt like to go through that process. And it was so painful. And you finally got to the other side and you saw how you didn't need those friends and that you recognized how people should be treating you. And you found those friends. And it makes you angry and it makes you upset. And so when you're talking to your daughter, you're angry and your tone is angry. And she's like, why are you mad at me? And you're like, I'm not mad at you. But she feels like you're mad at her and that you're not really listening, right? So you can see how on your side of the street, in your experience, that it's a lot happening that is going to impact your ability to be able to really listen to her and allow her to have her own experience. So here are some questions I think are really, really useful in this process. My go-to question, because whenever I'm irrational or reactive or have an outsized reaction, it's usually based on a fear. Usually based on a fear. So what am I afraid of? What does this remind me of? That's kind of the example I just gave. Let me give you an example of what am I afraid of. a kid is blowing off homework, just doesn't want to do it. And no matter how much you kind of like, you ask nicely or you threaten or whatever's happening, your kid just doesn't want to do homework, right? And then you just start getting really mad and activated. And you're like, what is, I'm paying for this education for you. And like, let me give you examples that I've done, things that I've said, right? Like, do you understand, how lucky you are to have this education and you're blowing off this assignment. And all of a sudden, one assignment becomes, you have no appreciation for your privilege. You have no appreciation for what your parents do for you. And you have all the resources in the world and you're not taking advantage of them, right? What is the fear under that? The fear under that is, I'm going to raise an entitled kid who will never amount to anything because they're just going to be lazy and not take advantage of their opportunities and blow things off and end up unfulfilled, unhappy, and yeah. I think that's enough, right? So like, can I play out my whole story of fear associated with my kid being like, I don't really care about that homework assignment, right? Can I become aware of where I'm going down that rabbit hole? And then that rabbit hole makes me angry and it makes me scared. And I start reacting, the opposite of steady. So just noticing. Interesting. That really activated me. What's the story under that story? What am I afraid of? What does this remind me of? The third one, what do I want the result to be? When you're talking to your kid and they're sharing an experience with friends or with school, our investment in trying to engineer or control the result, which results in us not really hearing what they have to say, but trying to intervene and kind of engineer. We'll talk about this a little bit more. And then just a more generic question, like, what uncomfortable thoughts or feelings does this raise in me? So I'll say, this is not the kind of thing that like when you're activated and your kid is, saying something that upsets you, that you're going to be like, what am I afraid of? What does this remind me of? What uncomfortable thoughts does this raise in me, right? Like you're flooded. You're reacting. You're like, oh shit, I'm reacting. What's happening? I'm busy. I got to do lunch. I got to make dinner. And it's like life does not lend itself to having space all the time to ask these questions. I want to acknowledge that. And so the only thing you do in that moment is say, something's going on here. Note to self. Maybe when I have a little time, I'm going to think about that one. That's huge. Just a noticing. Interesting, my kid said this. What did it raise in me? Just that noticing. Okay, so part of this is about how you get your kids to talk to you also, right? How do you create a safe enough space where they're willing to show themselves to you? And so there's an obvious one, right? It's like they're going to lie to you if they think they'll get in trouble. I wish I had the answer to the question of how do you manage not condoning something while still making it safe enough for them to tell you. Like, I wish I had that answer. If any of you do, let me know. It's a really tricky balance, right? And it's very personal. No one else can tell you where that balance is for you and your family, what you're okay with, what you're not okay with. For me personally, I really have leaned into trying to get my kids to be honest with me. And I think that there's definitely an aspect of they don't want to get in trouble, but there's also an aspect that some of us overlook is they'll lie if they think we can't handle it. If they think this is going to upset mom too much, she can't handle it. So how do we cultivate this steadiness so that when they tell us something, we don't flip out and basically teach them, train them to never tell us anything ever again? Okay, so the questions are like, how steady can you stay? How much can you create a pause and a noticing of, wow, I'm really being activated right now. The previous slide with the questions where I said, if you can just notice when you're getting activated, that will open up a lot of self-reflection. If you can just notice where you want to snap and react, even if it's after the fact, that's huge. And just try and create a little bit of pause. So can you work through awareness to expand your capacity to hold the truth with steadiness? To just be like, wow, that really triggered something deep in me. I think that's on my side of the street. Let me just pause on that reaction for a moment. But there's a really, really important question, which is, do you really want to know? We say that to our kids, you tell me what's going on. I want to know. You can be honest, but is that really true? So you really, because by the way, my mother knew nothing about what I did. I didn't tell her because she couldn't handle it. I talk to her now and I say, should I have told you all these things? And she says, no, because I couldn't have handled it. I recognize that knowing what's going on with my kids is much harder than not knowing. It's really hard, really hard. So do you really want to know? If you haven't built the reservoir of steadiness to hold what they have to tell you, they will not tell you. And how can we hold that reservoir? We can start to examine what they're telling us, what is activating in us, and work through that ourselves. This is why our kids are our greatest teachers. They will find things that you thought you had figured out deep inside, and they will poke at it and you'll be like, oh, right, that part of me is not yet steady and resolved. So they're an amazing way for us to learn about ourselves. It's really, really hard work. One of the lines that I found is really, really useful with kids when they tell you something that's like hard for them to tell you is, thank you for trusting me enough to share this with me. The pause also applies here, right? And I'm going to go over the pause a little bit later, which is when they've told you something like they're having sex, or they're doing drugs, or they cheated on a test, or, things that are like hard for kids to tell you, you don't have to react right away. You can just say and acknowledge, thank you for trusting me enough to share this with me. Okay. So this is the whole work. The whole work is cultivating self-awareness by asking yourself questions to build your tolerance for being able to manage your own experience in order to allow them to have their own, in order for them to feel that you are holding a space that is safe enough for them to actually be honest and share themselves with you. And again, the first step is always noticing. If you've noticed, that's, I don't want to assign a number to it. It's 90% if you've noticed. I love this quote. Cory Muscara, he's a Buddhist scholar and he's on Instagram. I like his stuff a lot. So he says, sometimes we need to repeat a negative pattern many times before we're finally ready to let it go. But there is a big difference between going through a pattern on autopilot and going through a pattern with embodied awareness. A pattern that is in the background of our awareness is being reinforced. A pattern that is in the foreground of our awareness is being released. So if you just notice, oh shit, I did that thing again. Awesome. Amazing job. And if you can remember, try and give yourself so much credit for having noticed that it outweighs maybe the negative self-talk that you give yourself for having done that thing again. Oh, I blew up at my kid again. Or, oh, I interrupted her again. Or, oh, whatever it is. So give yourself a lot of credit for noticing, especially the things that you're like, I probably shouldn't have done that. I'm not thrilled about that. Oftentimes when we notice something like that, it's followed by a lot of self-shaming. See if we can replace that with, wow, now that it's in my awareness, I've taken the first most important and biggest step towards releasing that pattern. So here, part of what we do is Nushu group, where we create spaces to create awareness through asking questions like this. So questions like, I had an incident with my kid. What was that about? Why was I so activated? Is exactly what we do in these groups. So I'm just putting this out there to people here. If anyone is interested in putting a group together to cultivate a self-awareness around this, it's not an offering that we have yet, but we have, I think we're going to drop it in the chat, like a really short form just to register interest. And we'll put it out in an email also so that if people want a space with other people in a similar boat to think about these things, talk through things, that's a possibility. So I don't think it's in the chat yet, but I'm sure Kat will put it in shortly. There it is. Okay. So that's I could kind of stop here. But I also want to leave you not with just an overall, the key to holding space for your teenager is just creating awareness of yourself. Like that is the overall message, but it's also really, really hard. It's complicated. It's challenging work. And I want to give you a couple of very specific tools with respect to holding space for your teenager. So let's talk about fixing and understanding the dynamic a little bit around fixing. A lot of what I teach in facilitator training and in general is that a lot of this work isn't about learning a new skill. It's about unlearning something old. So this is a really, really good example of this, where we've gotten into a pattern of doing something in a certain way for a certain reason. And we need to notice every time we do it to kind of unlearn what we've been conditioned to do for a long time. And so like as mothers, I don't know if there are any fathers here, or as parents, we have this feeling like that we need to help fix our kids, right? We need to really do something. We really need to show our value as a mother by how much we give, how much we do. It's it's crazy, this culture of mother martyrdom that I'm really actively working to unlearn. But fixing is also one of those things that if I do a group and I say, okay, who here identifies themselves as a fixer? Like someone who fixes their kids. I might get a few people who are really honest and they're like, yeah, it's me. I do it all the time, right? And then if I say, well, okay, maybe you're not a fixer, but how many of you are really invested in helping your children? Many, many more hands will go up, right? And so let's really understand where helping isn't helping, specifically with respect to holding space. And so fixing comes, especially with our kids, from a deep place of love, right? We're not doing it for any other reason than the fact that we love our kids and we want to help them. But when we swoop into fix, what we do say subconsciously to our kids is, I don't actually believe that you can handle this by yourself. So I'm going to step in, right? We don't mean to do this. We're not meaning to undermine their ability to do it themselves. But we're kind of saying I don't really think that you have the skills to handle this alone, so I'm going to step in. So fixing kind of says let me tell you the answer and let me help you do this because I don't think you can do it. And support says, I believe in your fundamental ability to handle the situation. And I will actually say this to myself in my head when my kid is being dumb, right? When my kid is when I'm I don't know that my kid has the ability to handle this situation based on previous experience and what they're saying to me, they do not have the ability to handle this situation. I will say to myself, I believe in your fundamental ability to handle the situation. I will be there for you. You may not be there yet. This is a process of getting you there that I'm going to support. But at the end of the day, I believe in you. I believe that you have the capacity to make good decisions, make good judgment later in your life. Even if you prove me wrong over and over again, I believe in your ability to do this. And it's a very different, energetic approach to your kid. So support says, I believe in your ability to handle the situation. You don't need to do it perfectly. You can make mistakes. And I am here to provide what you need as support, a listening ear, a hug, belief in you, advice when you ask for it. So again, I'm not saying that we send our kids off on a boat and say, good luck, I believe in your ability to do it. Like they need a lot of scaffolding for us, depending on your kid, right? Some more, some less. I'm speaking specifically about this one little gap that we can create, this one little pause that we can create before we move to the solution, before we move to here's how we do this. And an approach to our kids, which is not about like, they don't know what to do, we know what to do, we're going to tell them because they need to learn. They don't yet know what they need to do. We have a lot more experience. How can we create so much space and ask so many questions that they come to it on their own, eventually, with a lot of patience from the parents, right? How can we empower them to create awareness themselves and come to the place themselves with resisting that urge to just give them the answer right away? So it's just a little bit of a pause. So here's another tool. When in doubt, ask. Would you like my advice on this, or do you just want me to listen? Maybe some of you already do this, but I think this is an unbelievable tool with teenagers. Because a lot of times they'll say, yeah, I just want you to listen. I don't actually need anything. I don't need the answer. I don't need you to help me with anything. I just need a place to listen. So asking this question, would you like my advice, or do you just want me to listen? All these little tools that we can implement to create a little less intervention, a little more space for somebody to feel seen and heard. The other thing I think, just on the topic of asking, is just like asking questions. So I kind of forgot to put this quote in here, but it's a Lori Gottlieb quote. She wrote the book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. And I'm not quoting it exactly right, but she basically says, my job as a therapist is to ask you questions and listen you into clarity. Right? It's like my job as a parent is to ask you questions so that you can listen yourself into clarity. I have found with my kids that a lot of times they kind of know, like, I don't really need to tell them, like, hypothetically, my kid is in a toxic relationship with somebody else. It's really, really toxic and horrible. Like, they know, he knows. I don't need to say, like, this is a toxic relationship. I can say, like, how do you feel? Like, what do you think about this relationship and like how it is in terms of like different types of relationships, and how would you characterize it? That's a much more powerful question than, yeah, this is toxic, you should get out of this relationship. It requires a lot of patience, because waiting for somebody to come to their own realization can take longer than feels comfortable for you. I don't know if any of you have ever had a toxic relationship that you stayed in for way too long, but I have. And nobody could tell me until I was ready, until I knew it myself. And all I needed along the way was support. I didn't need somebody telling me that I should get out of the relationship. I knew, but I had to get there myself. So it's this tolerance for knowing that your kid kind of has to get there themselves, and using your questions to help get them there, and asking questions rather than giving answers, and being there and listening and asking, do you just want me to listen? And doing that when they say so. Okay, so that's a tool. When in doubt, ask. This is a great tool that I credit to, it's a tool I've used, but I credit it in this form to Lisa D'Amour, who wrote a brilliant book on Tangled. If you haven't read it and you have teenage girls, you must. It's really, really good. It's very, very helpful in understanding why they say the things they do that are so baffling. And so when you understand why they say them, you can just let them say them without telling them how baffling they are to you. And one of the tools that she mentioned in a podcast recently is, can you listen to your kid with one goal? To be able to accurately reflect back to your kid what you heard them say. This is a very different type of listening. Right? A lot of times we listen with a view towards giving our response. We listen to respond rather than listening just to listen. And so this exercise really forces you to be in that seat of listening and not response, where you say, okay, I'm going to listen with only the goal of being able to, after the fact, say, I'm hearing you say, or I heard you say, and then is that accurate? That's a way for kids to really feel heard, to really feel seen, to know that you are actually really listening. A lot of times people will say to me, but like, if I'm just listening and I'm not reacting, or I'm not giving them like a reaction, like, how does my kid know I'm listening? Or how does somebody know I'm really listening? And one thing you can say is, I'm not going to react. I'm just going to give you space, but no, I'm really listening, even if I don't give you a reaction or say something afterwards. And the other way is to do this. This might feel more comfortable for those of you who are more comfortable with action. It's like, I'm going to reflect back to you what you said and ask you if that's accurate. It's an amazing tool. So we've talked about this before, the pause. The pause can apply in that moment of reactivity, but it can also apply in terms of like, there's no statute of limitations on when you can reflect on something and come back to your kid and talk to them about it. It's not like if you don't have the exact right thing to say in that moment and you miss the moment, you've missed it. And in addition, when your kid tells you something, it's okay to say like, I want you to know I'm listening. I want you to know I've heard what you have to say. I need a moment to take this in and to really register this and really think about it. And then we can talk about it. I actually think that's really calming to a kid so that they know like, okay, I can tell my parents something big and they're not going to react right away. Like I'm going to have a moment and they're going to have a moment. The pause also applies to giving your kid a moment longer to come to his own conclusion. What we do in Nushu group, and there's some facilitators here on the call who know this, is we basically just say things out loud and are witnessed. And all of a sudden, just by saying it out loud, not by trying to problem solve it or fix it or figure it out, all of a sudden saying it out loud and somebody witnessing it can create so much clarity for us. So trusting in the fact that if you can just give your kid enough space to say something out loud, they might surprise you with the conclusions they draw. They're really smart, our kids, really, really smart. And so when you're tempted to swoop in, just say, can I give it a little bit more of a pause? Do I have to say that? Or could I kind of just maybe pause for a moment and say nothing? When you're thinking about saying something like, does this need to be said? Can I just say less? Can I say less? I'm definitely guilty of this. I've had many dinner conversations with the kids where I was out to dinner with one of my kids, out to lunch with one of my kids and my husband, and we were talking about something and he was sharing, my kid was sharing, and after the fact, my husband said, Vanessa, fewer words. You were so excited that he was sharing with you and that he was understanding things and you just talked and talked and talked, and he would have said more if you had said yes. And I was like, oh, you're so right. You're so right. Sometimes they will say more, but only if we say less. Okay, so validation. I don't know how much people know about this term, but I'm just going to go over it really, really quickly with respect to one specific dynamic. So imagine your kid comes to you and is really upset and is like, I have no friends. They all hate me. I'm never going to have any friends ever again. And no matter what I do, there is no way I will ever have a friend at this school, and they're all talking about me, right? So you might be tempted to say, well, what about so-and-so? She's your friend. And what about this person who wanted to like invite you to their birthday party? And like, you do have friends. And, you know, you're definitely going to have friends again, and they don't all hate you. And it's not really true what you're feeling. It's not true. You have friends, right? And so you're saying this because you want your kid to feel better. And actually, maybe you see an objective truth that your kid actually does have friends, right? So what they're saying is not actually true in your estimation. But what they hear is I don't care about how you feel. So sometimes as parents, we have to not respond to what our children say. We have to respond to what our children mean. Right? So our kids say, I have no friends. And what we want to say is, that's not true. What they mean, what your kid might mean in that moment is, I'm really, really scared that my social circle is going to evaporate, and then I'm not going to have friends, and then I'm going to have to go to school and face that room of people, and I'm terrified. And so what they want to hear isn't, you shouldn't be scared. You shouldn't be scared. It's fine. You have lots of friends. What they want to hear is, oh God, yeah, that feels so scary. That sounds really hard. Tell me more. What can I do to support you? Yeah, that's really hard. Not, I know, we'll like create a lunch and we'll invite all your friends and we'll like, right? That's like into problem solving and fixing. Or don't worry, it'll be fine. You've got lots of friends. They just want to hear, wow, that sounds really hard. And the key here is sometimes we feel like we're validating insanity, right? Sometimes we feel like what they're saying is so crazy because maybe like as teenagers, like I know mine, they just need to say it in that really extreme way to get it out, even if they don't really, really, really mean it or believe it exactly in those terms. Like, I will never have a friend again for the rest of my life. Right? It's probably not factually accurate, but in this case, it doesn't matter. It's a way to express how your teen feels. So it's so unfair. My teachers hate me. They're all completely out to get me, and they single me out, and I'm the only one. And literally, this teacher is going to fail me. Oh, that sounds really stressful. Yeah, wow, that sounds really stressful. Not like, no, that teacher's so nice. Like, how are you going to fail? You've got a B. I don't understand, right? So just validate the feeling underneath, even something that sounds like it's just not accurate, not true. I didn't leave any time for questions or shares. I'm so sorry. Okay, my final thought here. This is really, really, really hard. It's like so hard as to be impossible, basically. It's like, if you're a perfectionist, like that's probably your biggest learning here. It is so hard. It's so impossible. You can't even approach perfection. It's so confusing. So you got to give yourself a break. Don't beat yourself up. Please, no shame. It doesn't help. Just like, how can I become a little bit more aware? How can I notice a little bit more? And in that way, you're holding space for yourself and modeling it for your teen. And so I beg you, don't beat yourself up. It's so, so hard. But if you have a consistent practice of noticing your own reactions, if you have a consistent practice of just self-study, of just becoming self-aware, you're going to model for your teen what I think is the key to happiness as a human being. It's just my opinion. The key to happiness, which is if you can become aware and know yourself, that's the only way to really achieve like a fulfilled life that's happy. And so this consistent, constant awareness of like, who am I? Who am I actually? What do I need? How do I feel? What are my gifts? Who am I? If you can model that for your kids, they'll see you do it. And that's a gift to them too.